So, you know, a case study is only as good as the story it has to tell, basically. So all I'm going to do is tell you a story. We can peel from that things that we might think are relevant or of interest. But I do hope not too many of you have heard the story before. If you have, then just try not to snort too loudly. The picture, really, I just wanted to illustrate where Ennerdale is, just in case you don't know. If you watched Country Fire about 3 weeks ago, they did a feature on the wild Ennerdale Valley, so you might have seen it there. But it's a delightful West Cumbrian community, right on the foothills of the Cumbrian Mountains. And Ennerdale Bridge is a sort of gateway to that. It's difficult to get into the valley without going through Ennerdale Village. Not impossible, we're trying to make it impossible. It's got other benefits, so the road, what I can do is, oh look, there's a flower, look. This road here, there are approximately 25,000 people a year walk down that hill because they're on the Wainwright coast to coast. And if they're reading their copy of Wainwright as they walk down that hill, it says you're now reaching the end of day one of the coast-to-coast walk and you're entering Ennerdale Village. And after an 8-mile trek from St Bees, my God, you need a pint, and the very first thing that you see as you walk down the hill is the Fox and Hounds pub. So it's an interesting place. But in showing it to you, I'm sure you've got some preconceived notions then about what living in a place like that is like. And I want to talk instead about the disadvantages of living in a rural community in the present day. And it's what I describe as rural decline. And I would highlight the loss of services, so the loss of a bus service, the loss of a shop or a post office, the loss of your village pub, even in Ennerdale Bridge, the loss of your telephone. So a public telephone box, we still have one. It doesn't have a phone in it, but we've got a public telephone box. We've been invited to use it for all sorts of things, recycling centres or information points or art displays and so on. We haven't decided yet quite what to do. It'd be really nice. I think if you just put a phone in there, that'd be quite nice. So, what does that do to people? And my story really is about people. What that does to people is to drive them inwards into themselves in some way, because you're losing from the dynamic within the community a lot of the opportunities that used to be there for people to meet with each other, to communicate, to chat informally, to engage and so on. And what the project's illustrated to me over the period of the last 12 months is in talking to individuals within the community about their life before and after this strategy that we deployed. Before, they were talking about being imprisoned in their own home. I'll point you to the lady who used that terminology. I used to go out and I used to meet people, but I've not spoken to anybody in the village now for about 5 months. And it's that sense of imprisonment and enclosure that's driven by the loss of service. She used to go to the shops. There isn't a shop. She used to catch the bus to go to Cockermouth. The bus service as well. It's not being cancelled. The parish council now funds it to run once a week. So we have a bus every Thursday. Or is it Wednesday? Does it come back? Yes. It goes out at 10 and it comes back at about 3:30. So as long as whatever activity you want to do in Cockermouth can be contained within that time frame, you're okay. So unless you've got a car, you're actually isolated within the village, or you're highly reliant on people. So where do you go when you're in that sort of environment where you're feeling a sense of enclosure and restriction? And it was the parish council, in our instance, who instigated a discussion within the community. But I say that lightly, and we come back again and again and again to the issue of discussion within the community, because it's so vital to the success of the venture. So the discussion was, so we're losing all these services, what should we do about it? They did that by a leaflet drop and a questionnaire. They then did something very West Cumbrian. You gather from my accent I'm not West Cumbrian, so I'm just learning about this. Evergreen, South London, that I mean, is my origins. I married a girl whose mother was born in Crowsdown, up here. That's why I'm here. What's your excuse? So the parish council did something typically West Cumbrian. They organised a gather. Do you know what a gather is? Okay, so a community gather. They got everyone to Tyson's Field. They put a big marquee up. They put a hog roast on. They organised some games for children, run by three adults in the village, hopping and skipping and jumping, all those things that children like to do. And they got a beer tent. And then along the marquee, with a 40-foot marquee, all along one wall were big boards, display boards with sheets of paper with, so do you want a village shop? How often would you use it? Tick these boxes, so it's got lots of response sheets. The same about the post office, any other ideas and so on. So out of all of that, it was a terrific event, up to about 6:30 when the midges came out. But it was a terrific event, and the parish council then took all that information away and came back with a short list of things that people wanted. I think there were about a dozen things. So it included camping facilities and cycle hire, as well as shops and post office and stuff like that. So out of this discussion within the community emerged something really quite concrete. The parish council, being the parish council blessed them, decided they ought to have another gather. So 12 months on from the first gather, they had a second gather. Very similar layout. The beer tent was still there, and the hog roast now extended to a hog roast and a lamb roast. It's very elaborate. But it was an all-ticket event because the first was so popular that they were overrun with volunteers to come and enjoy themselves. But essentially they went back to them and put this, so this is what your proposition looks like. So what do you think about this? So the second gather reflected on the outcomes of the first and refined it. And the refined document then went out to a feasibility study. They commissioned an external group of consultants. They were funded by Cumbria Fells and Dales, which I think is essentially DEFRA money. And they got £9,000 and they gave them this consultancy the opportunity to look at the ideas that emerged from the community and say whether or not they were viable, and if they were viable, how it might be done. All of this information, if you want it, is available online. So if you go to the Wild Ennerdale website, which I think is www.wildennerdale.org, but just Google Wild Ennerdale, you'll find links to all of these, and all on PDF, so help yourself if you want to look and see what that looks like. So there we go. And you were saying to me earlier, I think, a lot of social enterprise does this really well. It comes up with lots of ideas, lots of discussion, produces a document, and then nothing happens. Yeah? So the can-do attitude that lots of those people and organisations have is just not adequate. It doesn't meet the bill. Things don't happen. So how do you make them happen? What's the magic ingredient? What's the silver bullet that will actually create something that works? And I'm not sure I know what the answer to that is. In our case, that was the catalyst. So after all the debate and all the discussion and documents and feasibility studies, all of that commissioned, the thing that made the difference was the village pub Sheffield. So the project up until this point had not been about the Fox and Hounds at all, and it still isn't about the Fox and Hounds. But the Fox and Hounds was the catalyst, it was the thing that drove people to distraction. You know, we've been talking for 2 years about loss of services, and now the bloody pub's shut. So, I can actually give you the date. If I can find it, the 22nd of October 2010. Why do I remember that date? It's because it was my first engagement, other than going and eating a hog roast. It was my first engagement with the project when a guy called Will Rawling, I'll introduce you to him later, knocked on the door and said, Peter, we've been talking about this bloody village project for 2 years. Is there any chance you could make it happen? I said, well, yes, things can happen. I'm happy to talk about how it might happen, but yeah, we can make it happen if you want it to happen. And at that point, you know, I knew absolutely nothing about cooperatives or running a pub or anything else. And I guess what I was thinking in terms of was sort of project management skill, which was my background. And yes, you can make things happen. So that was my introduction to it, and at that point I was really shifting around, trying to find a strategy, and it was then that I came across this crew and their advice about cooperatives, and it seemed to me to be a logical step forward, to create a cooperative within the community, to allow the community to have ownership of this. Not necessarily the fabric, but at least the idea and the concept and the business. And that information, together with a rudimentary business plan that I put together, enabled me to go and talk to the group who've been talking for 2 years. So I sat in the community room in the village church and was introduced by Will, and Will said, well, Peter says he's going to make this happen. Is that what you want to do? And they said, oh, yes, please. And I had to make a couple of important points. I think they're important. You be the judge of that. The first of those two was a can-do attitude on my behalf and within this group is not adequate. A can-do attitude will not produce change. You have to have a can-do, will-do attitude. The will-do element is critical because at times it's unpopular. Because if you're going to do a will-do as well as a can-do attitude, you're going at times to a bulldozer and ride over people's anxieties. You're going to step beyond the risk-averse individuals who want things to happen but not really sure that it can. So firstly, we're going to deploy a can-do, will-do attitude, and that may mean running roughshod over some individual perceptions of what we're doing. And that's important. The second is, whilst you're saying to me, can I do it? The answer is no, I can't. No individual is going to make this happen. It's going to happen if everybody collectively agrees that it's going to happen. So it's that collectiveness that will make the difference, not an individual wanting things to happen. So if those were the two elements which were different, I don't know whether they were or not, but I get a sense that they were quite significant. So from that point on, we decided, okay, if it's a community venture, let's talk to the community. So we arranged, that was in January, we arranged a meeting in February, I think it was February 24th, when we would invite people to come to the village church and talk about it. We got 130 people turned up. The vicar joked that there had not been that many people in the church since 1784, I think it was. So it was a very large gathering, filled the nave, filled the gallery at the top. Thanks. and was quite remarkable. And the proposition was simple. Look, what we want to do is to take over this place. Is that what everyone wants? And there was unanimity. Give us our pub back, was their cry. Literally, give us our pub back. So, okay, we can have our pub back, but it's going to take money. We can do it collectively. That means we need you to contribute. How much do you need? Well, our business plan says £67,000. So can we, in this community, 1,000 souls of all ages, so could we raise £67,000 is the question. And people said they would pledge. Yeah, we'll try and do it. There were a lot of sceptical voices to be heard. You know, you can't raise £67,000 in a community this small. It's just not possible. What we'd actually done was to set the level of shareholding fairly low, at £100. So to be a party to this, all you need is £100. If you can't afford £100 personally, then you and your neighbours can join together and 20 each from a row of houses. If you've got more, that will be very welcome, but you're not allowed more than £20,000. Okay, £20,000 absolute ceiling. Even if you invest £20,000, when it comes to the problem of running the organisation, you only get one vote. What a disincentive to invest in lots of money that is. Oh, sorry, that's called democracy, isn't it? So that was the proposition. The only other element of the complexion was that the owner of the fabric, the building, a nice man called Norman had said, well, yeah, okay, if the community wants to run the pub, but I need to know, because I'm going to sell the lease on if you don't get your act together, so I'll give you 2 weeks. So by the time we got to the meeting, that reduced to 10 days. So part of the discussion was, yes, please, pledge your money. I've got to show Norman within 10 days that we can do £67,000. Something called an update was critical in that. I simply said, leave me your email address, I'll let you know how we're getting on, and that was the birth of the update. We reached that £67,000 figure in 8 days. That was in pledges, it wasn't real money. And the way that the updates impacted on that, and still impact now, even a year on, was simply, in the first day, I was startled because by 9:30 I got £5,000, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon it had risen to 15. So I sent an update in the morning saying, great, £5,000. What do you do at 3:30 in the afternoon? Issue another update. I said £5,000, look where we are now. At times in that 8-day period, I was sending out emails, mass email messages to all the people in the village, just plotting this dramatic rise in income. It was phenomenal. And the impact on people was quite startling. They'd stop me in the street and say, how much now? How much now? Oh, well, we're only at 43,000, but we've got much more days yet. And so on. But the sense of energy that created in the community was absolutely wonderful, wonderful to see. The actual figures, let me show you where we are now. Is that. So as of today, we've got £89,850. The global total is not important. What's important is the number and range of shareholders. £100 minimum level, almost 40% of our shareholders are in at the minimum level. And you might say that doesn't show a great deal of faith in the enterprise. It does actually show a great deal of faith, because they're all people of all persuasions and all financial circumstances in that number, and a lot of them, £100 is a big investment. There are, interestingly, 3 shareholders in at £4,000, so despite my expectation that it would put people off only having one vote, it didn't at all. And I was being stopped as I walked or drove down into the village, often by farmers in large vehicles who would say, "How's it going, Peter?" "Fine, thanks. Did you want my money now?" I said, "Well, yes, please. You said you'd give me £2 grand, so £2 would be really nice." "Okay then." And into the cab, and out comes the envelope. Let me shout it out for you. 300, 400. And it was those sorts of conversations going on. I'd written into my thinking that from the pledge, I'd allowed 20% wastage of people not coming up with the goods. Sensible. Not one person failed to deliver. But every single person who pledged actually handed over their money. And they did so in really short order. The story of going with an envelope with £67,000 and NatWest and trying to open a bank account as an industrial and providence society is another story which I'll bore you with at some other time. So, from closure, through shareholding, to this. So we had this sort of semi-derelict building with a chaotic garden, and we announced when we got to the £67,000 that we would open in 4 weeks. Why do that? Silly. It was because April the 1st is the start of the coast-to-coast season, and we knew that the first of those £26,000 would be walking past the end of the car park, and so we needed to open. So we declared volunteering days and volunteering weekends, and literally dozens and dozens of people turned up. And what did we need them to do? We needed them to build, to garden, to clean, to repaint and refurbish, and so on. So this is all then about. So that, the volunteering was the most important element. It wasn't about the pub, it wasn't about reopening. Go back to my starting point, it was about the impact of rural decline and what people need in order to change. Could you just go back? Yeah. Watch out for this little fella here, Patrick, 8 years old. He was such a hard-working little devil. You could see him at all points in the project, can I just do this, shall I just do that? He is now Chief Bet Watcher. He has a badge, Chief Bet Watcher, and he picks up crisp packets and things as they drop into the bed. He was heard on, I think, day 3, emerging from his house just by the side of the pub saying, "Mum, just going to the pub!" And off he went. Sorry, didn't mean to delay. Keep going. And so it was the impact on this group of people, on a small community, of being together, working together, being really dynamic and so on. So I do need to move on because I'm running out of time fast. So there we were, and after 4 weeks of frenetic activity, we eventually had, you go really fast now if you like, we really did get to the point where we were ready to open. And it was a superhuman effort. Just stop there for a minute. 90, 86. You did a dry stone wall repairing, who do you ask? People in the community. So I didn't keep going. So that's the impact, and that's really significant, and it's just a range and number of people, and the energy and the social interaction and the purpose and so on. You have a whole group of people just driven to do something. That's your role in making the tea. Say no more. No, that's right, carry on. I was just a passing. The garden, if you now go into the garden, it was dreadful. It's now absolutely wonderful. We just put this next slide. Just put that, because it's got a certain aura about it. Notice who's there at the front. Patrick. and so on. So the boards came down, and lo and behold, there we were, April the 4th, 2010, ready to open and open. Yeah. So shareholders. So, that's the story so far, but the critical question is, so what next? Because if you go back again, it started not from the pub, did not appear in the feasibility study anywhere, because the pub was still open and the feasibility study was commissioned. So the pub is, by the way, it was, the catalyst, the starting point, but the what next is, so what about all those other things in our feasibility study? So where are we now? We are at phase 2, and just there's the pub at the bottom of that hill, and if you turn round, next slide, you see this, an old Forestry Commission building. And I looked at that and thought, my God, that'd make a nice shop. And therefore had a conversation with the Forestry Commission, who said, well, it's derelict and unused, so yes, all right then, £1 a year? Thank you very much indeed. But having then looked at it, it clearly is not fit for purpose, and it will cost about £100,000 to refurbish it. So where we are now is, let's knock it down. So another community meeting, again in the church, this time only 48 people, but that's fine. And their view was, so these are the options, we can refurbish this, £100,000, or we could build something new. We look at some of the new things. Mm-hmm. So we did all of this with them. These were extracts from the slide presentation we did then. So that's a pictogram or something, different size letters depending on how people responded. So, this is what our thing is going to do, and this is how it's going to be managed, and will it pay or won't it? Here's the business plan, etc. And we're going to collaborate with these people. So the people who run the valley are going to be based in our new shop visitor centre, the Ennerdale Centre. Yeah, I'll explain why it's called the Ennerdale Centre in a minute. So what we could do is to refurbish, or alternatively, we could put up a new building, or alternatively, we could put up a prefab. A modular building. So where we are now is we're engaged in that big debate about, so what sort of building, who might provide it, what will it cost, and so on. The intention is to be open probably spring of next year, I would think. So the key issue then about community enterprise is that you can perceive it as a model for producing one outcome, but its potential is far wider than that. We are not engaged in running a pub, and I should have been firmer in saying, please don't put the Fox and Hounds on my label, put Ennerdale Hub on my label, because it's about a much wider community enterprise. Is it working really well? Yes and no. It's working really well as a business. So in its first 11 months against my forecast in the business plan of a turnover of £250,000, in the first 11 months we did £270,000. So in 11 months we're already in excess. It'll be around £310,000, £320,000 by the end of this week. So is it working? Yes, it is. Management is a nightmare. But how you actually find somebody, 7 pubs in this country close every month. So where are all the personnel then? Where are all the experienced managers? Are you volunteering? Sorry. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Just stop me, otherwise I'll switch on forever.
How does it work with the person who does run the pub? Because I know that some community pubs just charge a rent, and then the business and how much money is made is all up to the tenant.
Yeah.
Who runs it. Is it slightly different from that?
Well, there's an interesting difference in the model between ours and Julian's this afternoon talking about the old crowd, we determined, because we wanted to be for community benefit, because we have this much wider project that we wanted the pub to subsidise, so to make the shop possible and the visitor centre possible and so on. Our working assumption was, let's not just sell on the lease and get just a rental, not least because we have to take the rental and then give it to Norman, because we're part of a chain, a supply chain. If the thing's going to make a profit, and it damn well should do, let's take that profit and use it into the village. On that basis, don't sell on the lease, just put in a manager and take the profit. Give them a profit share, but put the majority of the profit back into the village. So that's the model. It hasn't worked yet. Because
it's not profitable enough for the village?
No, it's because we've not found anyone with the skills to do the management job effectively. Surprisingly, to run a pub, a village pub with 3 B&B rooms, a restaurant which at times has 130 covers during the day. Yeah.
Not first, though.
Not first, no. Teetotal.
Can I just ask a question about your shareholding list?
Yeah.
It looked to me like there was a sort of a pattern in that there were people that bought shares for £100. There was a bunch.
Yeah.
A bunch that bought for £250.
Yeah.
A bunch at
86. Yeah.
A bunch at 1,000, and a bunch at, I think there was 2,000 and
Yeah.
4,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But presumably there's some psychology there in that people tend to plump for a nice round number, 500, 250,
Yes.
100.
Yes.
Was that just luck? Or
Yes.
Yeah. So you didn't ask for those numbers particularly?
No. We just said it's minimum 100, maximum 20,000, just give us what you can.
When the pledges were totally informal and oral?
Yes. Nothing formal, nothing written down, except in emails. Put me down to 200, put me down to 500.
Are you paying interest on the charity?
No. We're thinking about dividend in June, given that we've taken £300,000 across the bar in that period of time and made no profit at all. Dividends would be not very big, I don't think, but there may be things we can do about that, because we want to encourage people to think outside the pub. This isn't just about the pub, it's about the shop. So we're trying to revitalise their thinking about community shares and the shop now, even though we said that the Industrial and Providence Society will deliver the pub, the shop and a series of other projects. The problem is it won't do without further investment, and when you've been to people and they've given you 90 grand, it's very hard to go back and say, now I need another 90 grand.
Well, clearly 4% better than building society. So
It is, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right.
What about trying to simplify the model so that you don't get involved in managing day-to-day operation?
Yeah.
You take your cut from the rent, so if you put a higher rent and then left the public to actually get on, and it's up to them then to manage whether or not staff are steering.
Yeah. Reliant on two things. Firstly, finding the people with the skills to run it. We've not found anyone yet. And the second problem is that the rent is currently, to us, £2,000 a month. So you have, if you wanted to do something substantial with it, the rent would be unaffordable for an incoming tenant.
That sounds like a structural problem.
Yeah.
No, very high rent.
Very high rent. Good old Norman. So I've witted on long enough and your coffee's waiting.
Yeah.
So perhaps I should start.
Thank you very much.